And welcome. You don't know me, but you do know the guy on the other side of the screen. JC, how are you?
I'm very well, Michael. Hello everyone, and welcome to Friday Forum Live. We are live today from Point Blank Music School in East London, in Studio One, or SSL room here behind. And we are joined by Michael Adams, Director at Training and Development at Waves. Michael is live from Miami, so slightly time difference here. And today we're going to look at some interesting mixing techniques using Waves plugins. Um, and the idea is how to think outside the box when you're actually mixing in the box. So, Michael, as always, it's a real pleasure to do this session with you today. And what do you have in store for us today?
So, one of the things I thought I'd do was go through a bit of my workflow because a lot of the time, what happens when somebody's sitting in my studio with me, they there's usually a response that, wait, is that all you're doing? How does it sound so good? Or wait, is that all you're doing? I thought it would take longer. And one of the things it comes down to is trying to make sure that your DAW and what you've got in front of you in the way of tools are working for you and you're not working for them. And one of the biggest things with that is, I mean, you and I have discussed this. It's not really, this subject is not really about breaking myths, but it is about making sure that you really think outside the box and stop thinking within any preset of rules, per se. So we're going to use just a few plugins, and just those few plugins, I'm going to do a mix and show you some of the things you can do with it, and hopefully push people to, walk away and go, huh, interesting. Let me try that.
Brilliant. Cool. Shall we?
All right, let's. Okay, cool. So I'm going to, so just so you guys know, I'm going to mute JC, but I'm going to bring him back on the screen every now and again. So JC, muting you just so if you want to have a phone call or anything. There you go. And here we are. So welcome to my studio. I am an Australian working out of Miami, Florida, and as the director of training and development for Waves Audio, there's a couple of things that I do. One of them is I create a lot of the training material that goes out to the world. I train the specialists who work for Waves. I work in development on some of their products, and I glue the whole thing together. And I'm also the guy on stage most of the time when there's an event or a training at different places. So I am coming to Point Blank as soon as the pandemic is over. Okay. So the session that we are going to be messing around with is a Pro Tools session, and let's look at it there. I'm going to take myself off the screen. There we go. And I'm going to just take you through a bit of this session. So let's move to the mix screen. And there we go. Okay, cool. So this is a pop rock session. And one of the first things I want to talk about is kind of the way I organize things, because it doesn't matter whether I'm working on an EDM track. It doesn't matter whether I'm working on a pop or a rock track. It's like I had to mute all of them so I couldn't hear them for a second. So, but any track I have, wherever it's coming from, I put it into this format, and the format is really simple. I have a master fader, which is my master out. Then I have a submaster, which we'll get to. And then I have what we call, or I call, the session VCA. Then I have an auxiliary that is a vocal mix. I have an auxiliary that is a music mix. And then I have a auxiliary for the backup vocals, one for the drums, and then I have a guitar bus as well. But then I also have vocal effect buses. So one, and then two of those, and then from there on is all the tracks. So from this channel to this channel, the buses and the effects, those are in every single session that I make. And it doesn't matter who sends me a session, these things turn up regardless, because I want to be able to move things into my kitchen. One of the best analogies I've ever given, and I keep on giving it, is when you're mixing a record for yourself or for somebody else, it is very, very much like being in a kitchen. If you have to go into somebody else's kitchen in somebody else's house and you have to go, okay, right, so I have to make a souffle. All right, so where is everything? So you spend way too much time working out where things are, how does the oven work, where are the pans, blah, 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 blah. Guys, it's a pain in the ass. So the easiest thing to do whenever any session comes to you is spend time putting it into a format that literally works for you. And that's really important. If you talk to Andrew Sheps, who has enough Grammys and awards and hit records to his name to pave a road around the world, he does the same thing. Tony Maserati does the same thing. Tom Lord Alge does the same thing. Chris Lord Alge does the same thing. Manny Marroquin does the same thing. The list goes on because it's the best way to do it. Do we all have the same template? No. But we all do the same thing, which is go, okay, right, so doesn't matter where this is, let me put it into my format first so that I can actually make the most of it. And now I'm just gonna unmute JC and bring him back. So JC, do you talk to these guys? How often do you talk to these guys and girls about organization when we're talking about things like this with prep?
It's actually the first lesson in our mixing course.
Oh, nice.
In our mixing module. Well, actually the second. The first one is on monitoring, and the second one is all about organizing your session. Do you color code? I mean, obviously it's up to you the way you're going to color code and stuff, but how do you bus? How do you group? Introducing those concepts, busing versus using VCA. We know with all of those ideas. So yeah, absolutely. It's such an important concept. If you do that right, as you know, Michael, I'm sure, as you agree, everything falls into place so much quicker after that once you get going.
Yeah, it really does. And this is why it's like, this is why I love doing these kind of things with Point Blank, because you guys teach things in a way that really does make sense in the real world. And there are some scenarios with different people who have come to me as interns and work experience from different schools where we have to try and unteach them first before we can teach them. And in your case, we never have to do that, which is freaking awesome. Okay, cool. So
cool, man.
Muting you again, and let's go back to my session. So what I have here is, let's bring it up. So I'm going to play for you the rough mix, and the rough mix sounds a bit like this.
I've heard you say it's the end of your day. Well, I've held inside a love for you that won't subside. You can call on me when you're feeling.
Okay, that's enough of that. So let's mute him again. The track, yeah. So there's a camera in the way, which is why I'm hitting the wrong button. Let's hit mute that. Okay, cool. So now, second thing I use a lot, doesn't matter which DAW I have, any tools I have that enable me to work quicker, I will use the hell out of them. And one of the ones I use a lot in Pro Tools is memory locations and Windows configurations. Has nothing to do with plugins, but you can't get to plugins unless you actually have some kind of workflow. Okay, so let's first take a look at what I'm doing with a guitar. And the reason I want to start on the guitar is because one of the plugins that you will see in a lot of my session is a 1, 2-band or 4-band EQ. There's not a lot of plugins going on here. In fact, there's really not many at all, and that's absolutely fine because it actually makes it easier for me. So I use a lot of 1-band, 2-band, and 4-band EQs. And one of the reasons why is because what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to clean things up. So let's have a listen. Just bypass those plugins. Here's my acoustic guitar. Now, it does actually make a difference how an instrument was recorded. In this case, these instruments were recorded really well, which is nice. Makes it easier on you, but it doesn't make it impossible when you have a bad instrument. You can still fix it, and I'm going to show you how. All right, so there we have that, and then we get to the chorus, and suddenly the guitar, it gets a bit more intense. So my first thing to talk to you about is if you are going to be doing any kind of compression on an instrument and you've got an instrument like that that's dynamic and they play quietly and then they play hard, work on the processing on the hard part first, because otherwise you're not going to have really anything to go off and you're going to have to try and bring yourself back. So in this case here, I'm going to bring up a really simple plugin. You know, one day I'm going to work out what this GeoForce Experience in-game overlay keeps on coming up is. No idea what it is. So here we have, this is Renaissance Axe. Renaissance Axe is 3 faders. It's threshold for the compression, which also deals in a way with attack and release and ratio. There is a separate attack fader underneath that is kind of extreme, and then you have gain. Now, one of the reasons I love this plugin on many instruments is because it's kind of a rough compressor. So let's bring it in. All right, let me just loop that for a second. So let me bypass it. So bypass. Okay, so now I'm going to unsolo it.
All on me when you're feeling down. I could bring the sunlight in your life. You can call on me. Yeah.
This is at the point where I want to talk to you about something that you may have seen in studios, you may have seen it on YouTube. I've got to be honest, there's some really good stuff on YouTube, but there's also some really bad stuff. One of the things that really, really, really annoys me is when I see people do tutorials and 90% of it is them soloing an instrument. I'm going to ask you, even though I can't see the comments right now, but I'm going to ask you, and JC can tell me, I'm going to unmute him so he can talk to me from somewhere in the ether. How many times have you been listening to a song on the radio and you've gone, wow, I bet that guitar sounded great soloed? It just doesn't happen. It's so when you're processing something and you want to make sure that it actually is processed correctly, yes, by all means, take a listen for a second in solo mode, but don't leave it in solo because that's not the way that it's going to be heard. So I want to be able to hear this
Love for you that won't subside.
with the processing. So
You can call on me.
So if I bypass the plugin,
Down, I could bring the sunlight
the
in.
guitar kind of disappears. Now if I bring it back in,
Yeah. Baby, don't you frown.
I can hear it again. Now, myth number 2. You see, JC, I'm still blending myths in. There shouldn't always be a dramatic difference. In fact, you don't want a dramatic difference. You want to understand what it is that you're doing. So if we go back and we solo this again, right? All I want to do is I want to make it fatter. So let's bypass it. It's nice, but that just makes it a bit fatter. I could probably go a bit more extreme. What I don't want to do is just make it louder. And that's something that you can do. So let's bring the gain down a bit. It's got more body, and that's what I want, so it can fight through.
You can call on me, yeah. Baby, don't you frown.
When I take it out, the guitar suddenly just disappears, and that's not what you want. So you want to be able to listen to things not on solo for more than a couple of seconds at a time. Okay, so now, hypocritically, I'm going to go back to solo so I can just show you this. This is a one-band EQ. A one-band EQ is, without a doubt, your friend. JC, you're back with me. So what do you talk to when you're teaching these guys and girls? How, I mean, does a one-band EQ come into it much? I mean, where does low pass and high pass come into it?
Yeah, I've always believed, and I'm slightly older than the younger guys working in the box, so the filter is your best friend, isn't it, when it comes to EQ? I think I've always come from that. It just comes from electronic, isn't it? It's a simpler design. So back in the days of analog world, the signal was a bit cleaner from a filter, and the more complex the EQ becomes, the more kind of artifact you bring in. I mean, obviously technology has evolved now, and linear phase, and etc. But basically, I come from that old school ways of the less the better in terms of EQ. So the filter is your first port of call. If you can clean, that's it.
Right. And to go one step further, it's subtractive EQ is pretty much the thing I end up doing more than actually additional EQ, because I want to know what I've got and give things space to breathe. And this is one of the other reasons why when, if we go back into, I'm not muting you, my friend, I'm just moving screens for a second. So if we go back to my session, and I go back to my mix window, there's not very many plugins in this mix, but it sounds fat as heck. So it's one of those things that you have to be very, very careful about what you do, but you really have to understand why you're doing things as well and where things come in. A perfect example would be with a guitar and a vocal. Guitar, string instruments, and vocals. JC, you've come across this as well. It's like those two instruments, the vocal cords and guitars, they tend to have an awful lot of the same frequencies. And you have to be super careful about where you put them and where you let them breathe. Otherwise, the whole thing is just going to turn to mud. So let's have a listen to this guitar, and let's work out exactly what I'm doing with it. So I'm going to make this plugin a teeny weeny bit smaller. Yeah, that's better. That's more manageable. It's one of the cool things about the latest version of Waves is you can actually make stuff bigger and smaller and apply it as a default. So I have this guitar here, right? So let's... Now, there are some low frequencies here that I really don't want because I have a bass guitar in this track. So there's the bass guitar. So I've got a bass. So why the hell do I need low frequencies in any other instrument, pretty much? So I'm going to grab them and I'm going to get rid of them. Now, this is where, and this is why it's thinking outside the box while you're mixing in the box. This is one of those areas that, especially when you're coming up through the industry, you sometimes forget the fact that if you're soloing something, you're not getting the whole picture. So put it back in the mix, because sometimes things sound weirder soloed than they actually do in the mix. Perfect example, I just took all the bass out of this guitar. So by itself, sounds great, but it's not a solo instrument. Now, if I bring the bass back in, still cleaner. So that's
The sunlight in your life. You can call on me. Yeah.
I'm gonna mute both of those plugins.
Don't you frown. I could make your wish
Guitar's disappeared. So, okay.
I've seen you cry.
Get rid of that EQ again.
Didn't know how to make things right.
Hear the difference it makes to the track? Okay.
Well, I've cried for you.
So, your friend is a one-band EQ. It is without a doubt probably the one thing I use more than anything, to the point that I actually have it set as a default to go into a low pass into a low cut as soon as I open a one-band EQ. Because again, if you're gonna think outside the box while you're mixing in the box, you've got to make sure that you let your DAW and your plugins work for you, and don't hit the microphone while you're talking to a school of kids. Okay, cool. So we've got a guitar, we've got a bass. Now, I really got to stop pressing those buttons. Either that or I need better glasses. Okay, so here we have a bass track. And we've got, in this case, I have a two-band EQ, because, God, I'm crazy. But I'm using the same Renaissance Axe compressor. So I'm going to bypass both of these for a second. Okay, so I'm going to bring in the compressor first. And I'm going to make it a bit more extreme. Yep, that works. Okay, cool. So that was easy. I'm going to bring down the gain a bit more because I don't want to... It's I call it gain matching. Different people call it different things. Let's bring the esteemed coach back in. JC, what do you guys call? I mean, when you're talking about matching when you're processing, how do you guys discuss it? What's the term for it?
I call it the same way, matching the gain. Make sure you're always matching the gain.
Yeah.
You know, you've made a really good point, is that our ears can really easily trick us as human. As soon as you make it a bit louder, the first impression is that it sounds better,
right?
And it's not. So absolutely. I mean, as soon as that's the main thing. That's the way I always assess compression. If it works, is by gain matching. Otherwise, you can't tell. You really can't tell if it's doing the job that it's supposed to do.
Right, exactly. So you've got to make sure that you're not just going, oh, that sounds way better, and finding that it's actually just 4 dB louder. Now,
Totally.
So let's go back to the screen. So we have our compressor. It sounds okay. Bypass it. All right. So I'm making it fatter, but I'm not making it louder. So I'm giving it more presence. Now here's where the EQ comes in, and this is where people are like, "Why are you using a low cut on a bass guitar?" Because this bass guitar it's very clean, it's very sharp, and that means there are some higher frequency sharp edges on it, but also some lower ones that I don't want to try and muddy things up. I just want a solid bass. So I'm gonna add that compressor back in. So there's that. Now let's bring in the EQ. Now, first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off both of these bands, and I'm just going to bring in one at a time. So let's bring in the first one. So it's only getting rid of some really low frequencies, but this one is doing a lot more. So if I bypass both of these plugins, I could probably take this one a bit. Yeah, I can take that a bit further, and now I can take this a bit further. So we've gone from, come on, back to this bit here. Here we go, where he gets excited. Cleans it up, and it also cleans the noise up as well. So if you hear all that extra hiss, you don't need a denoising plugin. You just need to adjust your frequencies. And I can do that with 2 bands. Super easy. Now, again, what I'm doing is I'm making sure that it sits well. Now, if I take... Okay, so I've got an acoustic guitar and I've got a bass guitar. Let's take all the compressing and EQ off. Here we go. You can't tell them apart now. So that's one of the reasons why you want to know your 2-band EQs. Now we have 2 separate instruments. See how easy that was? It's like, okay, let's bring the esteemed coach back in. So JC, one of the things I love about giving that specific demonstration is how it goes from people going, oh, there's an acoustic guitar there, to suddenly, wow, there's an acoustic and a bass. And all we've done is a little bit of compression, but we've used a high pass and a low pass to great effect. And you could do that on nearly every single track. And people don't. People automatically go to, I'm going to use Abbey Road, and I'm going to use Eddie Kramer, and I'm going to use this. It's like, use the tools that you know will be in every single studio you are in. And 1-band EQ, 2-band EQ, they might not be glamorous, but frickin' hell, they do the job for you. And when you've got a client over your shoulder who's going, we're on the clock, then you really want to make sure that you've got that, right? He's nodding knowingly.
Yeah, no, sorry, it was cutting out. Yeah, no, I completely agree. You know, I've seen so many, you know, there's such an enthusiasm and madness for multi-band compression and stuff like that. And people are like, oh, you know, why don't you use multi-band compression on guitar? And I'm like, well, why? Why?
Right.
I couldn't agree more. You know, I mean, what you've done really shows how very simple techniques straight away I've done the job perfectly. There's no need for anything else.
No, there really isn't. Okay, so let's move on to the vocal, because I know we're on a bit of a time crunch here. So here we have the lead vocal and the backup vocal, and then we have vocal effects. So let's first deal with the lead vocal. Now, I have 2 EQs on here, but again, I could easily, if I wanted to, just go to a 2-band again. But first of all, let's bypass that, bypass the compression, and go straight to a busy part of the song where Mr. Rock and Roll is singing.
Any day.
Okay, cool. No, come on. Let's unsolo that and solo.
Many days I long to tell the truth, that you can call on me when you're feeling down. I could bring the sunlight in your life. You can call on me, yeah.
Okay, so the first things first, really quickly while we go through this, if I can hear the bleed from the headphones in the vocalist's recording, it means that he's going to be deaf before he's 50 at this range. So try and remember to keep your volume as low as possible. It's like, kids, seriously, it's not worth it. It's like I toured for 5 years and then went into studios, and I had tinnitus by the time I was 35, and it sucks. So all we're doing on this one is literally cleaning it up slightly, and there's a really, really easy tool to do this. If you remember, one of the things that I did when I was taking you through my mix was I set up all of these different auxiliaries. Now, if I press play, let's go.
Love for you that.
So I'm gonna mute the vocal mix for a second, right? Okay, so there's my music. So now what I can do is I can actually go in and do exactly the same with the music mix. So I want to have a listen to the vocal.
When you're feeling down, I could bring the sunlight in your life.
Okay, cool. So let's take this plugin back to default. So it's doing absolutely zip. And let's put it back in the mix and work it there.
Feeling down, I could bring the sunlight in your life. You can call on me, yeah. Baby, don't you frown. I could make your wishes come to life. When you're feeling down, I could bring the sunlight in your life.
Okay, so where it's really going to tell is the quiet section, because one of the things that a plugin like Avox does really well is level things out. So
didn't know how to make things right.
one more time.
Didn't know how to make
Quieter.
things right.
Gives him more presence.
Well, I've cried for you many days. I long to tell the truth.
Okay, one more time. Listen without.
Didn't know how to make things right.
And I'm staring at you because I want to stare anywhere but the plugin.
I've cried for you
Too quiet. It's going to get lost.
many days.
Much better.
I long to tell the truth. That you can call on me when you're feeling down.
Bypass it.
I could bring the sunlight in.
So when it hits the high parts, it doesn't change a lot. What does change is when it hits the low parts and his lower, quieter singing, it brings it up. Compression, done. It's like one of the things that a lot of people think is like, it must sound different. No, it must sound good. And that's one of the things that I think gets missed. So now let's bring in the EQ. So let's go to let's go to this part.
Baby, I will bring the sunlight in your life. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm
When you're feeling down,
I'm getting rid of the low frequencies,
bring the sunlight
and I'm pushing up a couple of the higher frequencies, but
you can call on me, yeah.
and I'm getting rid of a couple of the mid frequencies. Why? Well, have a listen. So let's listen without it for a second. Okay, so
A love for you that won't subside. You can call on me when you're feeling down. I could bring the sunlight in your life. You can call on me, yeah.
if you have those mid frequencies in there and those low frequencies in there, and you don't bring up some of those high frequencies, what you tend to do is make your vocal so prominent that it doesn't work well within the mix. So listen to things accordingly so that you can actually physically just listen to them, but be able to pull them out. So it's like, but then again, I have these wonderful faders, so I can go.
When you're feeling down, bring the sunlight in your life. You can call on me, yeah.
Perfect. So now the next thing I want to do is I want to bring in my effects again. So
A love for you that won't subside. You can call on me when you're feeling down. I could bring.
okay, you can stop whispering now, JC. It's like you're back on screen. So when it comes to effects, one of the things which I like talking to people about is EQing effects and processing effects. It's like, because if you want to really, really be thinking outside the box while you're mixing in the box, you've got to make sure that you don't just add a reverb or a delay, because if you're adding a reverb and a delay, you're basically saying, I love that sound so much, I'm going to repeat it 1,000 times over the next second and a half. But you're repeating the same frequencies over and over again. So what I like to do is I actually like to put a low cut or a high cut after a reverb, so that I can make sure that while it's repeating, it's not actually messing with anything else in the mix. Because again, that's how you avoid mud, right? How do you guys deal with that? I mean, is this similar to the way you guys are teaching that part of it?
Yeah, totally. You know, I mean, we go from basic EQing. Again, it's making that kind of space for the effects, isn't it, to sit in your mix and just fit. You know, I mean, it was interesting what you were doing on the vocal as well. This, you really could hear before the EQing where the vocal felt it was on top of the mix rather than in the mix.
Right.
And then as soon as you started to put the EQ in, suddenly the vocal gel in the mix. And that concept of gelling, and, you know, again, it goes back to what you were saying as well in terms of soloing. You know, you need to hear a mix as something that ultimately you wanted everything to gel and blend as a one thing.
Right.
And so all those techniques are so key to achieve that outcome.
But all of this comes down to one simple thing, which is, I mean, I'm going a bit over the time I promised, but it's like, it comes down to, a mix shouldn't be hard. To me, if I'm mixing, not creating, I need to be specific with the kids here. It's like, this is not about creating, this is about mixing. If I'm mixing something, and if I've set everything into my kitchen, my template, if it takes me longer than a few hours, then I'm doing something wrong, or there's something wrong with the material. It's like, I mean, I can mix a track this way in a couple of hours. And usually that means I walk away from it for 15, 20 minutes every now and again, come back, but collectively a couple of hours. Otherwise, there has to be something that I need to go back to the artist about, or the record label about. But it should be fairly simple, as long as you know that you're... I guess this is another time I could say, JC, it's like, it's not really about whether you like the music or not either. It's about frequencies. It's like, you know, if all the stuff I mixed was music I like, I'd never make any money. It's like, you've got to be able to go, okay, I'm listening to frequencies. I'm not listening to hip hop. I hate hip hop. Or rap, I hate rap, or this, I'm listening to frequencies, because that takes you out of the bias as well, which means that when you're working in the box, you're just listening to frequencies, and you're just making sure they work together to the best of your ability. If you could do that, then you've got a career.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk quickly about, and then, are there any questions in there for me to answer?
There's a couple of questions. Don Nathan mentions that, for example, he's using the RT6 in parallel to add a little bit of air at times.
Yeah.
Everything else, usually he kind of high pass and, you know, what you were talking about. So that's one thing. That do you have anything to say about that, for example?
Run that past me again. He's doing it in parallel.
Yeah, RT6 in
Oh.
parallel.
I guess it really depends on the content. I mean, I generally, I kind of have a reputation for people going, "Is that all you're doing?" Because unless I really want, I mean, even Andrew Sheps is starting to step away from parallel processing these days, not because it's wrong, just because he's kind of got past that flavor. And he's moving on to other things. There's a podcast I recorded with Andrew Sheps last week, which is coming out soon, which he talks about that. But parallel compression and parallel processing of any kind is not wrong. In fact, we actually have a plugin that lets you do that called Studio Rack, which is probably a whole new masterclass.
It's awesome. I mean, it brings parallel and features to the entire collection. It's amazing.
Right. Yeah, but there's a time and a place for it. And I think one of the things that needs to be pointed out here is if you can fix something in a really simple way, like there, I knew what I needed to do. I needed to get rid of the low frequency in his vocal. I needed to add a bit of high to get over the strings, and I needed to pull down the mids because otherwise there's nowhere for the guitars to sit. If I can do it in one plugin with no parallel processing, then I'll do it. There's no wrong way as long as it sounds good. So to that person's point, it's like, as long as it sounds good, knock yourself out. Just make sure it doesn't take you an hour and a half.
Yeah, that is the danger. I mean, when I started, I think for the first 10 years of as a mix engineer, I never used parallel. You know, it became a bit more of a fad. Especially in the DAW world, but I use parallel maybe for creative aspect of something that suddenly I'm like, okay, I'm going to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole here and be creative and try something really different. But otherwise, I don't feel there's a strong need for parallel.
But trying things, again, is like, that's one of the other things which I like talking about. And by the way, I always have to have something in my hand. So it's like, it's either going to be that or it's going to be my headphones or my phone. So if you see me fiddling with stuff, it's just because I don't sit still. It's an Australian thing. You have to have time, and you have to make time to actually experiment and know what your tools do. One of the key things with a workflow that's fast and makes your DAW work for you and you not for it is knowing what your tools do. So when there's a client sitting behind you, you know what you need to do, and you know what tool is there in your toolbox to be able to do it. In my case, I know all the Pro Tools ones back to front. I know most of the Studio One plugins back to front. I know all the Waves ones back to front, clearly. But there's 300 of them. And I have to tell you, you don't need 300 plugins. You just don't. I can mix it. I mean, I'm using, I can still hear you, JC, but you're off the screen for a second. So let's go back to the DAW. So in this session, I am using, how many separate plugins? So Arvox, let's look at the ones that are on. Arvox, Q1, Smack Attack, Audio Track, S1 Imager, so 4, 5, Renaissance Act 6, Q1, Q2, 7, and H delay 8. So I'm using 8 different plugins. And this is, it's not a tiny session, but it's not huge either. But I'm using so little plugins because I don't need lots of plugins to make this work. One of the key things with this as well is let's talk again about the organization of this. So I have strings, guitars, different things, but I have them all set up in a mix so that I can go, okay, right, so let's get rid of the vocals. So there's just the music, right? So now let's get rid of the drums. Still sounds good. I want it to sound good as I compartmentalize it, right? So now let's get rid of the guitars. Most of the guitars anyway. So there's the strings. Okay, so now let's bring in the vocals, and
A love for you that won't subside.
now you can see on the compression, I'm doing quite a lot of compression on the vocal, but I'm using a plugin that doesn't sound like it's compressing the crap out of it.
I could bring the sunlight in your life.
Now, you see I have
Call on me.
a backup bus here, so I have this backup vocals,
Don't you frown.
and on here, I'm taking out the low frequencies again, but I'm actually hyping some of the mid frequencies.
I'm
So let's do that again so you can have a listen. Let me pull them out.
for you that won't subside.
Okay, here they come.
You can call on me when you're feeling down.
Bring it back in.
I could bring the sunlight in your life.
So that's taking out the EQ. Let's bring the EQ back in.
Call on me, yeah. Baby, don't you frown. I could make your wishes.
And that's how I managed to get the EQ that way. It's like I never listened to it with just the backup vocals because, quite frankly, it just doesn't help you. So, takeaways from the last 40 odd minutes. Know your session organization so that you actually can get to things where you need them in any single session you want. I know that I can mute my vocals. I know I can mute my music. I know I can mute my effects. Now, here's another good one. So here's the whole session.
Love for you
Session VCA.
won't subside.
So VCA, voltage controlled amplitude. It's technically not a VCA. It's a DCA. JC, you're still audible even though you're not on screen. So if you want to chime in on this one, you can. The whole reason I have one VCA on here is because I also have my submaster fader over here, and I want to make sure
Love for you
that there's nothing that's in the mix that's too hot, but I want to make sure that the levels are pretty much where I want them to be on everything. So,
when you're feeling down.
and then if I want to bring it down a bit, let me go into
Call on me, yeah.
narrow mix. Okay, so now let me bring the VCA down.
I could make your wishes come to life.
Bring the whole mix down.
I've seen
Make the whole mix hotter. Let's bring it down again.
how to make things right.
That's why I like having a VCA, because especially if you're not mastering your own stuff, it gives you the chance to be able to listen to what's going on and make sure that dynamically you're not killing the entire session. The last thing I want to mention before we ask for any questions is the fact that I do have something on my master bus. I just don't use it unless I absolutely am sure that I'm happy with the mix. So let's bring it in. So, okay, so now let's bring this in.
You can call on me when you're feeling down.
Bypass it.
I could bring the sunlight in your life. You can call on me, yeah.
Now, one of the ways that I like using something on my master bus, if there's a compressor or a limiter involved, is I'll take the ratio to virtually nothing and I'll just slowly bring it up until I start to really hear.
Love for you.
See, no gain reduction there.
Subside.
Wait for the loud part of the song.
You can call on me. Love for you that won't subside. You can call.
Okay, let's go.
You can call on me when you're feeling down. I could bring the sunlight in.
I just want to glue it. That's all I want to do.
You can call on me, yeah. Baby, don't you frown.
If you're mixing into a compressor or a limiter, then you are cheating yourself because you're giving yourself a false feeling of security. You're giving yourself a false feeling of how the actual mix is really doing. And you're also putting yourself in a position where you're going to find that things are going to start getting muddier quicker. Don't mix into something unless you're really sure of exactly how it works, because otherwise you're not giving yourself the chance to actually make the session breathe. And that's with the few plugins I used and what I want you to try, which is low band, high band, a basic compressor, like two band EQs with low band and high band, a basic compressor, and EQing the parts of your reverbs out that you don't need repeating. I guarantee you your sessions are going to sound better. But if you put all of that into a template like this, where you know where everything is straight away, things work so much better. And you remember that you're being creative, that it's not about struggling with technology. It's about being creative. It's about making music, right? Right. So JC, any other questions?
Yes, there's few questions actually. So should we
love
take,
questions.
let's say,
Let's do them.
yes, there's lots of them. So let's try to do as much as we can in the time we have left. So don't you use the MV2 on bass guitar to even out notes?
Okay, so I'm gonna bring JC in on the DAW screen here, because so this is gonna look terrible for a second, guys, but he's gonna be big on the screen now, he's gonna be small on that. Okay, so let's talk for a second about the MV2, because it's the only plugin I haven't really talked about, but I have to tell you, MV2 is literally my favorite plugin for anything. So if we want to talk about it on the bass, right? So let's add MV2. Now, MV2 is what we call a low-level, high-level compressor. It's the little brother to Max Volume, which is one kick-ass plugin. What this does is it gives you the ability to bring up the low parts of dynamic range and squeeze the top parts. Now, the thing about MV2 is it's awfully transparent, which means I can get away with using this on a lot. But in the case of this guitar, I didn't so much really want to kind of just process it in a way that was transparent. I wanted to add a bit of grunge. So, and Renaissance Axe can kind of do that. So, but having said that, if I wanted to, I could get more perceived loudness out of MV2 really easily. So by literally just cranking up the low level, so, but it doesn't quite give me that. That sounds a bit grungier to me, which is what I wanted to go with that. So, now where MV2 comes in really handy is, say for example, a drum bus. Let's think for a second about a drum bus, which is right behind my freaking camera. There it is. Okay, cool. So, okay, so let's get rid of it.
I could bring the sunlight in your life. You can call.
Okay, cool. All right. Okay, so let's get Renax off there for a second. So, and okay, so let's say, for example, that the room didn't exist and all we had was overheads, right? So let's go MV2. So there's my drum room right there.
Didn't know how to make things right.
Bypass it.
I've cried for you.
That's the kind of thing that makes MV2 really, really kick ass, is its ability to take something like that and just bring out the nuances, bring out all those low dynamic sounds. So now listen to it for 5 seconds and I'll pull it out again. Here we go.
You can call on me. Yeah.
It's like there's no drum room now.
Baby, don't you frown.
So now that's the kind of thing I like using MV2 on. The other thing which I like using MV2 on as well is, you know, you could use it on the bass. If I had a cleaner bass, I would use it. I do use MV2 a lot on vocals and also on kick drums and snare drums. So say for example, right now I'm using on the snare drum, I'm using 2 plugins. This one is literally to make it dirty. And it does. But I could take both of those away and I could go MV2. And one of the things that MV2 does really well is it brings out, one of the things I love about a good snare drum that's played is that ring, that kind of like boing, but you've got to bring it out. So, okay, let's get rid of Kramer. So that's the snare. Now let's make it ring. Now what we need to do though is we need to be able to clean up what we've created. So now what we have,
I've seen you cry.
and now make it fit in the mix. Gain match.
Didn't know how to make things right.
Now if I pull that out again,
Well, I've cried for you.
you want him to play like Animal, and he wasn't playing like Animal. Now he is. The other thing you have to make sure is that you actually work out if you're just creating extra noise. So for example, with MV2 on that snare and Eddie Kramer, that's a lot of extra noise. So having just MV2 and NS1 cleans things up. And the only thing NS1 is doing in this case is getting rid of the noise that specifically comes through when I'm playing the snare. So, okay, where is it? So, okay, bypass this one again. Hear that? Because I've got Eddie Kramer as well, but if I want that, so NS1 is a kind of cool trick. So now the reason Eddie Kramer keeps on coming back in is because he's automated. So anyway, all right, next question, JC.
Cool. Sounds really, really cool. Really, I think people are really liking the MV2 tips. You know, people maybe don't realize what the MV2 is.
Oh
This
God,
kind of low
MV2.
level-
Yeah, MV2 is amazing. I could show you another one if you want.
Let's maybe take the other question if it's all working. So
You're the boss.
Harrison Code is asking. He's got an assignment where he's being asked to use different type of compressors for different things. But obviously, until now, he's asking, are you using mainly one compressor? Or what's your take on using different type of compression for different things?
So, it really kind of, I mean, you have to know what a compressor is doing for you. So like, say for example, Renaissance Axe, for example. The reason I use Renaissance Axe is because it's fast, it's simple, it deals with most of my attack release ratio and all those kind of things by itself. It's a bit like Arvox for guitars. So I can use it quickly and I know what I'm going to get out of it. I know it's going to be slightly grungy. So because of that, even though it's supposed to be for guitars, I know what I'm going to get out of it, so I can use it on anything. When I was mixing Creed, Scott Stapp's vocals for his last solo album, it's like I used a guitar plugin like Renaissance Axe on a lot of his vocals because I wanted to get that really growly sound. He already had a growly voice, but I wanted it even growlier. So I used this plugin on the screen because it's dirty. Now, there's so many plugins out there, and we do so many compressors. You have to spend some time working out why you might like an LA2A on a drum, why somebody might want to use a 76 on a guitar, why somebody might use different compressors on different things. But most importantly, it comes down to you going, okay, so I've done my testing and I know what I feel sounds good on different instruments. And I don't think it's anything less than you deciding what you think sounds best and how you're working. Because the rule is, there are no rules. I didn't have the opportunity to go to a school. I started as a coffee boy. So the guitar behind me, that guitar. So quick story, that guitar came from my second really large, important recording session where I didn't really have a clue what I was doing, but the main engineer was off sick that day. Somebody came into the studio, the front, the receptionist called me out, and this guy in a suit said, "Are you the mix engineer here?" And because I technically was that day, even though I was only the assistant, I said, "Yes." He goes, "Great. Last minute session, can you fit us in?" I went, "Yes." That's fine, and your butt cheeks do start to clench, though, when Robert Plant and Jimmy Page walk in. And I spent 3 days working with Robert Plant and Jimmy Page on an acoustic version of their album, which is called No Quarter. Now, the moral of this story is relevant to that last question because we spent half a day with Robert Plant sitting next to me with a microphone, just going, oh, oh, until we got his echo and his compression and his EQ right. And he'd said to me at the time, "These are not the usual ones I see being used, but I love the sound." And I was like, it's just what I know. It's what I know and what I'm comfortable with. So the key to the story is you can get from A to Z with any compressor as long as you know what it is. And how to get the most out of it. But what you never want to do is go, "There's this great new compressor from Waves. The video is really cool, and Chris Lord-Alge uses it. I must use it on everything." It's not how you work out your place in the industry. You've got to know why your processing is being done by you. That's the only person who's important. That was a long answer. Sorry, JC.
No, it's a great story. It was a great story about Robert Plant and Jimmy Page, by the way, Michael. But you're absolutely right. Learn your tool. I mean, it's better to start using maybe one compressor because you know it so well.
Yeah.
You know how it works. You know how the attack, the release, the ratio, all of that stuff. So absolutely. Shall we take one last question?
Please do.
There's a couple of guys on here who are asking about phasing.
Mm-hmm. There's some phasing going on in this session.
So one Worse X is asking a phasing issue tip maybe, and Mr. J Studios is saying, how do you end up with phase or cancelling signals? If you notice those, first of all, how do you pick phasing issues, potential phasing issues, and how can you resolve them? I know it's a big question, so I'm not, I suppose. It's about training your ears, isn't it, to pick up potential phasing issues?
Right. It is about training your ears. I mean, so for example, this session has some phasing issues. The problem though that is this session is the phasing issues are all in the way the lead vocal was recorded, and there's one part. If I really got to work on placement of my cameras. So if you have a listen to the lead vocal, maybe if I actually, gave you the chance to listen to it.
I've heard you say
Listen just for a second.
it's the end of your day. Well, I've held
There.
inside.
That's phasing, and it's like I don't have the ability to go back and get them to record that again. But if I was mixing the session and this was the first take of recording that came to me, I'd be like, there's some phasing in there. We've got to work out where that came from. But it's like phasing is generally, it sounds like there's movement within the actual file, or there's movement within the mix of how the different frequencies sit together. A lot of plugins, built-in ones or ours, have phase. You can reverse the phase. Sometimes that's great. A lot of the time, though, you really want to go, okay, right. So if you're stuck in a position where you have phase issues, you really want to go, okay, right. So are these issues that I'm responsible for and I'm responsible for fixing? Did they come in the recording that I'm mixing? Can we record that part again or do I need to fix it in the mix? If you're fixing it in the mix, then I feel really sorry for you, because getting rid of phasing issues that actually come printed in a recording is super hard unless you do some drastic monoing and panning. I mean, with that vocal, I think what happened was, I actually think they did some parallel processing while they were recording, and I think that there was some process phasing going on at the time. But this came to me as a mono signal, so there's nothing I can do about it. I just have to.
You can do.
No, I have to minimize it, which is also why I took out a lot of those low frequencies, though, and some of those mids, because that minimizes how much you can hear it when it's in the mix.
Yeah.
So yeah, so there's that. So
Can we take one last question, Michael?
Yeah, I'm here for you guys. Go for it.
Let's take the last one for today. So, Mr. J Studios asking, de-esser versus compressor as a de-esser.
It really depends on how big the problem is. The other thing that's interesting here is I'm going to bring up another plugin, and it's in my favorites, and it's called Shep's Omnichannel. Now, Shep's Omnichannel, let me put it over the screen so it's not in front of me and JC. This is Andrew Shep's dream plugin that he had in his head and we created for him. He uses this on all of his own records. This is not a marketing gimmick. He uses this plugin on all of his own mixes. Now, the important thing, and part of the answer to your question, is the de-esser in this plugin is a full frequency range de-esser, meaning you could use it on anything. Because a de-esser technically really is just a compressor in a way. So what you really want to be able to do is find the problem, sweep and find the problem, and work out how much you want to fix it and how much you want to maybe not fix it but suppress it. Because if you de-ess too much, you can actually give somebody a lisp and make them sound like Mike Tyson. And one of the greatest terms that I ever got taught when I was starting out as a coffee boy was, the guy who first gave me a chance said, I want it to be the best edit that I never heard. If I can hear that somebody is de-essing, then you failed. If I can hear that you're compressing, unless there's a really intent reason for it, then you failed. If I can hear the EQ, and yes, my friends, you can hear EQ if it's done badly, you failed. It's got to be the best edit that you never heard. It has to sound like it's surrounding you, it's doing what you want, but nobody thinks something's wrong there. So I would say that when you're de-essing, try and do it with EQ first before you actually go to a de-esser, unless you're using something like this, where you've got a full range de-esser that lets you sweep through the signal, the frequencies, and really work out what's wrong, and then just pad that down. So I think my last piece of advice for your friends out there, JC, would be there isn't anything that's wrong with anything you're doing in the studio. You have the ability these days that JC and I didn't, because we're old, when we started, which was you have an undo button. But you need to be able to spend the time on your material, not so much just practicing your material, but practicing your art and knowing what a plugin does. You need to be able to know that if you have a client sitting behind you, or you have an instructor or somebody at the school sitting there watching you mix, that when you bring things up, you bring them up with purpose, with commitment. You know what you're going to do. What you don't want to do ever in the studio with a client is go, okay, I guess I'll try that. So I'm not sure what this does. I think I'll move that. It's like you might as well just go home and go back to bed. It's you have to whatever you do it with purpose. But spend the time. Like Tony Maserati, he still spends at least an hour a week going through new plugins and working out what does what. And he'll ring me or text me. And it's like 10 o'clock last night. I got a text message. Hey man, you around? Cool, call me. He's like, dude, I'm messing with this new plugin that you guys released. What does this do? Because I'm kind of curious. And he's a multi-Grammy winner. He still learns every single week. You can't stop doing that. You really can't. You've just got to make sure that you know everything. And even if it's only 5 plugins, guys, learn them. Learn them, and you can mix a record with 5 plugins easily. That was my speech, JC. I'm getting off the soapbox now.
No, absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think, it's a great point you're saying. Like Tony Maserati, who's obviously an amazing engineer, so experienced. You still need to learn. You keep learning all the time.
Yeah.
Because you're never there. There's this misconception, I think, that people say, oh, you're there now. You've achieved that. No, it's a constant. You keep on learning, and really, it's better to use only 5 plugins that you know really well than 30 and you don't really know what they're doing. Because
right.
Chances are you're going to do a lot of wrong things, basically.
Yeah, I mean, something like the Mercury bundle, which is our bundle that has pretty much everything in it, is amazing. But the people who really that's for are people who have to have every single plugin, because sessions come in from other places and they have different plugins on them, and they have to know what those plugins sound like before they can decide whether they're keeping them or not. So someone like, me or Tony Maserati or Andrew Sheps or any of the other guys who actually make a living out of mixing, yes, you have every plugin known to man, because people are sending stuff into you and you need to know what's on their mix if they're sending you a session. However, if you're coming up through the ranks and you're working your way up, pick a bundle, pick select plugins. 5 plugins, I keep on coming back to that, would be my Desert Island plugins would be MV2, Arvox, Sheps Omnichannel, H-Delay, Renaissance Verb. Those are my plugins. I can mix a record with those. I can mix a plugin with, I mean, even without a reverb, I could do it, but I would prefer to have a reverb. But with those 5 plugins, if those were the only 5 plugins I ever had, I'd be happy forever, because they do everything I need them to do.
Yeah. Brilliant advice, Michael. Really, really brilliant. So I think we're gonna have to stop for today. It's been really great, and I hope everybody got a lot out of that session today with you, Michael, because there are, a lot of really, really valuable advice on here. So take your time, go back on it, watch it again. If there's any information you want to go over, put some question in the chat. Obviously, later on, we're going to keep that video up on our channel.
Oh, actually, I'm going to go one step further than that. So if you send me the questions, I'll actually do a video for you and answer all those questions, and you can post that.
That's amazing, Michael. That's absolutely amazing.
The other thing, guys, if you want to send a mix, feel free to send it through JC to me. If you guys want an idea of a mix, I'm happy to do a mix critique for you. It's I'm just know that I'm really honest with my critique. It's like if I think it sucks, I'll tell you it sucks, but I won't stop there. I'll go, okay, this sucks, but this is why, and this is how you fix it. And I think it's important to get advice and get opinions from people who don't know you at all, and are just listening to the music. The worst person you can go to advice for on your music is your mother or any family member. The last piece of advice I'll give you is if you've listened to a song for more than an hour in the studio, your ears are not making your decisions anymore. Your brain is. You need to walk away from it and come back a couple of hours later.
Yeah, totally. Another advice that, and I still do it myself, is always sometime when you listen from another room as well.
Yeah.
Getting a slightly different perspective from it. So Michael, thank you very much. I really like this idea of actually a mixed critic. So maybe let's start putting that together and
Love to.
organize a session. Would be amazing. I think the guys would really appreciate that.
I'd be happy. I'd be totally happy to.
I think that would be a great session to do together, man.
And by the way, I'm really sorry I went longer, guys. It's like I just tend. It's like unless you shut me up, I'll just keep going.
Thanks so much for your time. So everybody, thank you so much for watching. Remember, if you want to find out more information about all our courses, you can head to pointblankmusicschool.com. I'm wishing you everybody a great weekend and see you all soon. Michael, thank you so much. And guys, if you want to check more Waves plugin, check all the videos with Michael. There's a lot of really, really great tips that are out there.
Thank you. And everybody, I hope you're healthy. I hope you're staying masked up. And I got my second jab last week, so I'm fully vaccinated now. So that's awesome. I hope you're well. Hope you're all healthy. And JC, it's been fun. I'm now going to hit the close button.
Take care. Stay safe.
Much love, people. MPA out. Peace.